Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at Genesis Communications Network. I'm Vincent Finelli. And here's a number if you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, 605-477-3249, 605-477-3249. Rich Scheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you doing this morning?
Well, okay. I've got some sad news I'd like to report. Actually, I don't want to report it, but it's something that I got an email from Captain John Regan last night. And there's a radio broadcast tag team known as Hagman and Hagman. And it's a father and son broadcast. Father is Doug Hagman, USA Prepares instructor. Son is Joe Hagman. And the two guys would broadcast them. And pretty darn good broadcast. It's on the internet. Well, here's part of the email that I received from John Regan last night. It said, Joe Hagman died. That'd be the son. Joe Hagman died Saturday at the age of 36. He has, and then it goes on to say, what makes this really sad is his wife is pregnant and due in a few weeks. So, very sad news. I'm sorry to report it, but that's the situation. So, life is short, class. Make the most of it. And enjoy it. Do the right thing, because you'll be remembered by what you've done. That will be your legacy, what you've done. If you are in the fleecing business and you fleece people, you will be remembered for that. If you're kind, you'll be remembered for that. If you're a troll, you'll be remembered for that. Rich, when I was at the university back in the 70s, there were two methods of teaching. One was called the Harvard approach. The other method was the econometric approach. And the Harvard approach was storytelling, situations, events. Here were the conditions. Here's what people did. Here's the result. Okay, that would be the storytelling type approach. And that was the Harvard method. The other method was the econometric method. Everything can be measured by numbers, charts, graphs, trends, and you can predict the future based on these charts and graphs. And really numbers-based. Well, I was exposed to both. And for radio, the numbers approach doesn't work. No, maybe it does, but I don't know how to do it. So we use the Harvard approach, and we teach by telling stories. So some people may wonder, why do we do that? Well, that's what they do at Harvard. And if you go to law school, that's the way they teach you law. Case after case after case, you study the cases, who did what happened, what was the result, what were the feelings, what did the jury do, what the perpetrator do, what the police do, who was injured, who's the defendant, who's the plaintiff, what actually happened. Well, I want to tell you a story about yesterday. And this applies to everybody. Here's a lesson that you can all learn from. Everybody who's behind a vehicle, the wheel of a vehicle, or in the seat of a vehicle. This affects all of you. So it was about 100 degrees yesterday, and I was in the truck with our son, and we were on the interstate. And the speed limit's 70, and we're doing just a couple miles an hour below the speed limit. And it was really hot, about 100 degrees, in the bright, bright sun. And I saw the temperature gauge climb and climb and climb. I thought, wow. And the engine seemed to have a tougher time. And it seemed like the vehicle was just having a tough time when normally it would just have no problem at all, just doing 68 miles an hour. Now, the truck is a 2004 Chevrolet Silverado V6 with a 4-speed automatic transmission. It's a work truck. It's plain Jane, nothing fancy. It's got rubber mats, no carpeting, crank-up windows, but it does have air conditioning. So, here's the story. The engine started to run faster and faster and faster, but the speed, miles per hour, was going down. And you may experience something like this with a vehicle that you're driving. Well, it seemed like I lost overdrive. And then it seemed like I lost fourth gear. And then it seemed like I lost third gear. And then, in order to keep the vehicle at 60 miles an hour, the engine was running at a little over a half maximum RPM, which is 3,500 RPM. So we pulled over at a safe spot, got off the interstate, pulled over in a safe spot, and pulled the dipstick on the transmission, checked it with a clean paper towel, and the transmission fluid was burned. Normally it's bright pink. It was burned. It was brown. It smelled burned. So we were almost 100 miles from home. So what do you do? And that's where the lesson comes in. So what do you do if you have a situation like this? First thing you do is you turn the air conditioning off. And you open up the windows. And you turn the heater to maximum temperature and maximum volume. And what you want to do is you want to remove the heat from the radiator. And so here we are running at 3,500 RPM, which is, pretty substantial RPM. And the transmission is slipping. The transmission slipping is generating excess heat. Now there's a little heat exchanger in the radiator of most vehicles, and the excess heat from the transmission is dumped into the radiator, and the radiator then cools off the transmission heat exchanger to cool the transmission off. I'm talking about an automatic transmission. So the slipping was putting excess heat into the radiator, which was not allowing the engine to cool enough. So the engine temperature was climbing. So the way to mitigate that is to turn the heat on maximum, as if it's freezing cold outside. But it was 100 degrees outside. It was unbearable in the car, and we thought it'd be a good thing to get home. So what you do is put the heater on maximum, if you can stand it, now don't kill yourself doing this, okay? And turn the air volume on maximum and open all the windows to let the heat out. So now you have two radiators, the radiator under the hood, and the heater becomes a radiator. And you dump the heat into the air, both under the hood and in the cabin. So that was the solution, and we got home. Now I've got to repair the transmission, take it out, and rebuild the clutch pack or replace the clutch pack for fourth and third gear, and replace the star cluster, which is another part of the transmission. So I'm going to do that. Now, since it's getting so hot, and since we're experiencing all kinds of overheating problems, tractors, cars, trucks, everything's overheating because of this enormous heat. So what do you do? Well, what I do is I take a garden hose and I hose off the radiator and the air conditioning condenser. Now, you have to be careful because you don't want to get the electronics wet. And some cars have electric motor-driven auxiliary fans to cool off the air conditioning condenser. The air conditioning condenser is that little radiator, looks like a radiator, but it's in front of the engine radiator. So if you get the debris, the bugs, and all that out, that'd be great. You can use a spray bottle with diluted dishwashing liquid, and you can gently mist off your radiator, get it wet, then add a spray of dishwashing detergent diluted with water, and then hose it off because you'll loosen the surface. You'll increase you'll reduce the surface tension that holds the bugs and dirt on your radiator, by using detergent. That's what detergent does. It reduces surface tension. And get that dirt out, and you'll have more effective heat exchange from the radiator to the air. Okay? So that's what you do. And in the same line of thinking, if you have a refrigerator and a freezer, now's the time to vacuum out those coils. If the coils are behind the refrigerator, pull it out, vacuum them. If the coils are underneath the refrigerator, there's usually an access panel. Sometimes it takes screws to remove it. Sometimes it just pops off. Get your vacuum cleaner in there and vacuum off those coils. Because if you do that, your compressor in your freezer and your refrigerator won't have to work so hard. If it won't have to work so hard, it'll run cooler. If it runs cooler, it'll last longer. Okay? So sometimes the coils are on the back of the refrigerator or freezer. Sometimes they're underneath. And sometimes you don't have coils. You have a heat exchanger, which is the outside box of the refrigerator or the freezer. So just feel it. If it feels warm, that's where your heat exchanger is. That means that you need at least 1 inch of airspace around the refrigerator on all sides. Minimum 1 inch, top, bottom, left, right. And some people collect things on top of the refrigerator. Well, if your refrigerator feels warm at the top, that's your heat exchanger. And if you've got dust collectors on top of the refrigerator, decorative things, whatever you put up there, baskets, you are reducing the capacity of your refrigerator to dump the heat. And if it can't dump the heat effectively, you're going to overtax the compressor. Rich Scheben, any thoughts on what I said?
Well, first of all, I would like to make a comment about the Hagmans. I was on their show a few years ago once, and they really cared about giving helpful information to the little people. They were gracious, humble, well-read and studied. They were about truth, and they were patriots. And, I think this is a really good example of, life is short and we need to live every day like it's our last. However, what if every patriotic American, I think this is a good time to ask ourselves this question. What if every patriotic American actually stood for principle and wasn't selfish enough to desire to get everyone's approval, not caring about political correctness, more caring about truth? I think if more people did what the Hagmans do, I think we would be in a much better place because we would not stand for all the things that are happening today. And, there's, Vince, if I may, I just want to read just a few articles before we go into our topic of the day. Senator Rogers exposes Democrat plot to turn U.S. border operations over to the United Nations. Democrats push plan to hold gun makers liable for mass shootings. Even though there's less than 100 mass shootings in the country per year, and there's over 2,000 illegal immigrants killing American citizens, that means our lawyers, judges, and politicians are allowed to, the people are allowed to take their wealth when an illegal immigrant takes the life of a loved one. Same premise. Next article, all 10 candidates support health care for illegal immigrants. Tom Fitton says no one's talking about Democrat voter fraud. The left is stealing elections. If we don't fix voter fraud, nothing matters what we talk about on this show.
Okay, hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Rich Scheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. Rich, did you say that there is a proposal to hold gun manufacturers liable for killings? Is that what you said?
That is correct. Democrats push plan to hold gun makers liable for mass shootings. This came out on June 12th. This article is saving it for an appropriate moment because I feel what the Hagmans stood for. They stood for the rule of law. They stood for the Bill of Rights and our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how the powers that be on the left can say that what people like they say or we say are unpopular. Basically what they're doing is talking about the rule of law. And it's if we all stood for principle, if we all stood for the rule of law, stood for truth, I think America wouldn't be in the position we're in now because too many people are hedging their bets. And Joe and Doug Hagman are great examples of people who don't hedge their bets. And that's what we all need to do. We all need to come together, especially as the bottom 93% of income earners, because it's a lot less left-right paradigm, a lot more aristocracy controlling and managing the serfs. And, here's an example of an article that goes with that clump of articles I just mentioned. Leaked document shows Google is encouraging employees to stage anti-Trump protest. Now, folks, this isn't me. What some people think that I might make these articles up. These are articles published in the public domain. So we all have to we have to heed the warnings of these articles, because we're heading to a very dark place where we won't even have the rule of law if we're run by the UN or any other globalist outfit. Vince?
I do everything I can to avoid using Google. I don't use Facebook. If I need to access something, it says log in with Facebook. I can't do that because I shut down my Facebook account a long time ago. And about this holding gun manufacturers liable for killings, I think it's a great idea. But first, we should hold all fluoride tooth manufacturers liable for causing disease. We should hold all smart meter manufacturers liable for causing disease. We should hold all antifreeze and coolant manufacturers liable for poisoning animals because of the GDP's lack of understanding that antifreeze for a car, if it drips and your cat loves the taste of it, it'll kill the cat or the dog almost immediately. And let's hold the keyboard manufacturers liable for carpal tunnel syndrome, and the soda manufacturers liable for the plastic pollution that's killing the sea life. And let's hold the impact wrench manufacturers liable for all the hearing loss from that loud sound of the impact hammer, or the subway operators, which would be municipal and city governments, liable for hearing loss. Okay, so it's endless. But
I can add to that list, yes. Vince. Let's hold the Monsantos liable for
yes.
all GMO ingredients, all consequences, including cancer and DNA changes. Let's hold the all big tech liable for everything from RF waves to 5G, cell phones, the whole works. All the people, all these little kids, especially getting cancer in urban and suburban America from the 5G towers. Let's hold them all liable. See, this is the thing. As long as they can censor and control with the use of technology, censor and surveil and control, they don't care about the health consequences. It's all BS. It's all theater. And this is why we need to hold people's feet to the fire. We can't have one thing that kills more people being acceptable, like illegal aliens, and there's nothing to do with skin pigmentation or gender or sexual orientation. It has nothing to do with it. The American people are broke, and the people who are getting all the negative consequences of illegal immigration are the poor and the middle class, a.k.a. the bottom 93% of income earners, Vince.
Absolutely. And when we come back, let's talk a little bit about school systems. Let's talk about the power lines. And while we're going to a break, think about, are there power lines right near your schools? The answer is absolutely. We'll be right back. Rich Scheben, the GDP has infiltrated our public school system. And if you look at the public schools, the campuses, you will see, no matter which one you look at, you'll see high-tension power lines. You'll see high-voltage power lines. You'll see the towers nearby. You'll see, to make matters worse, you will see microwave access points in the classrooms, in the libraries, in the laboratories, and you'll see microwave towers on the campus, the school campus. So what most people do when they finally figure out that these young children have diseases and the teachers have diseases, and they think, gee, what's the common thread? Oh, they all show up at this school building. Well, typically what happens is people will wait for the monthly school board meeting to start asking questions. It never works. But what does work is you get all the people together on your team, the team that wants to shut down these harmful situations like the Wi-Fi, like the access points, like the microwave towers, the cell phone towers. You get all these people together, and you have meetings at homes, and you decide what your strategy is going to be. And then you go visit the superintendent's house. You go on the weekends, you go during the day, you go at night, and you go with a whole bunch of people. And you just park your cars right in front. And you talk, and you ring the doorbell, and you knock on the door, and you take turns visiting the front door. And pretty soon, it'll probably take a half hour. Pretty soon, they will get the message inside that house that this is not a good situation, that there are a whole bunch of people and we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how they're going to behave. They seem to be friendly right now, but it looks like their anger is increasing and they want something done. Now, when the superintendent of schools starts to feel it personally, that's when you get action. Because the wife becomes afraid. The children become afraid. And then what you do is you point out the wife and the children when they are shopping. You see, Mrs. Superintendent. And you point. And you keep pointing and pointing when you're at the supermarket. You say, that's her. And that's their little daughter. And that's their son. And that's her. And then when you go to church, you point them out at church. And within about a month, the pressure of just not knowing what the people who don't want the towers are going to do, just the unknown, will cause action. And probably those towers will come down. Probably the access points will be disconnected. And you demand it. You literally demand that your children be safe from electromagnetic radiation. So what happens is school systems talk about we need to be safe. So queers need to feel safe, so they have to have separate bathrooms. They want the queers to be safe. Well, you want your children to be safe, too, from electromagnetic radiation and other harmful things that are happening in school, not only in the bathroom. So that's how you do it, class. And does it work? It works. Do I know it works? I know it works. Rich Scheben?
Well, what about the old adage of it only works when it divides people, but how come the feminists can say, well, I should be able to do what I want with my own body? You know, folks, globalism is for the very few wealthy people at the top controlling everybody else. And control comes from censorship and surveillance and big tech. You know, there's an implication, whether it be the UN or whoever it is at the top, it's for the common good. They give this implication of, oh, we're benevolent dictators. There's no such thing as a benevolent dictator. This is an oxymoron. Science is for sale. It's bought and paid for by the highest bidder. So we have to look at the net results. We can't look at what they're saying. We have to look at what they're doing. And I think right now, especially in the realm of preparing for what's coming, I think that's one of the reasons why we talk about preparedness. That's why we talk about ideas and solutions and suggestions, mostly to help the little people, the bottom 93% of income earners, because we don't have representation, rights, or restitution under the rule of law. And this is why the elite want to distract, dumb down, and divide us by groups, so they control the people. It has nothing to do with any benevolence for the LGBTQD, whatever people, or for this gender, or for that skin pigmentation, or this sexual orientation, or that religion. That has nothing to do with it. It's all theater. It's all designed to create hate, to foment all this divide and conquer strategies. And there's many of them. We've talked about them many times over the years. So we have to realize that the bottom line is to keep the status quo where it is and to put everybody else in a caste system. And I think more and more people are waking up to this. Vince?
You know, I read this term, and it was LGBTQ, and then there was an I on the end of that. So I understand L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B is for bisexual, Q is for queer, T is for transvestite. And I don't know what the I stands for. Does that mean, I don't know? That depends. Depends on what time it is. What does the I stand for?
I have no idea. I have no clue.
Well, maybe that's,
it.
That's it.
They're going to stick,
I have no idea.
Every letter, every acronym. If there's two people in this world who might be ashamed of their behavior, there's going to be a letter and acronym thrown onto that. I guarantee you. And it's only, people need to realize if they feel entitled to play the victim group status card and to lower the bars of standards and expectations, especially for getting and keeping a job, you're being used to take down your own country. You're literally being used. You're being duped. You're being conned. You're being played. You're being poisoned to destroy us. We are letting the elite poison us from within. We have to judge by results, proven results, qualifications, hard work, effort. There's a whole list of criteria that's similar to that. Not by what sexual orientation you are, not by what gender you are, or what you identify as. This is why people like Candace Owens are so popular. We have to wake up, folks, because we're being used and we're poisoning us against ourselves. Vince?
Speaking of poisoning, there's a story on Daily Mail, and it says that the Food and Drug Administration, and this is in all seriousness, class, the Food and Drug Administration is investigating the deaths of 119 dogs and some cats because they have died of dilated cardiomyopathy, also known as DCM. And there's a link between the foods that these dogs have been eating and their death. And the foods contain legumes, seeds, and potatoes. So here are the foods that are being investigated. So you may want to pay attention to what dog foods you are buying, because there seems to be a link between these particular foods and the deaths of dogs and cats. And if my computer would just hold still and stop displaying more commercials, I could read them to you. Okay, here they are. Acana, A-C-A-N-A. That's one of the brands most reported in the DCM deaths of dogs. A-C-A-N-A, Acana. Zignature with a Z, Z-I-G, Zignature. Taste of the Wild. Another one is 4 Health, the number 4 and the word health. Another one is Earthborn Holistic. Another one is Blue Buffalo. And I remember Mrs. Finelli saying, we should try Blue Buffalo. Good thing we didn't. Another one is Nature's Domain. Another one is From, F-R-O-M-M. Who makes this stuff up? Another one is Merrick, M-E-R-R-I-C-K. California Natural. Boy, doesn't that sound good? California Natural. Natural Balance. Origin, O-R-I-J-E-N. O-R-I-J-E-N. Nature's Variety. Nutra-Source. Nutra-Source. Nutro. Now, we've used Nutro, N-U-T-R-O. And another one is Rachel Ray Nutrish. Rachel Ray Nutrish. So those are the ones to be concerned about right now. And if I were you, I would be calling the manufacturer saying, you know what? I heard this on the radio. And by the way, do the research. It's DCM. Do the research and look up DCM for the deaths of animals, and then tell them, you know what, I bought X number of bags, I want my money back. And if my dog dies, I'm going to drive my car through your front window. I mean, I'm only kidding about that. Well, half kidding. Actually, I can't say that on the air. But I might say something like that, that if my dog dies, I'm coming to see you. And I had a dog die. I had a dog die from eating Menu brand, MENU brand dog food, which is a major manufacturer from Canada of dog food sold in the United States under a bunch of labels. So, I don't know, maybe 10 labels. Menu. And what was in it? Melamine. What is melamine? It's a toxic substance that is trash. That's a result of manufacturing, and it comes from China. So what can we do with melamine? What can we do with melamine? Well, we can't put it in toothpaste because fluoride already has that spot. And water already has that spot, so we can't put it in the municipal water supply. What can we do with dog food? Let's put it in dog food. And it's just filler. It'll be okay. Small amounts won't kill too many dogs. Well, it did. And it killed my dog, my golden retriever. And I'll never forget it. And I'd love to meet the CEO of Menu Foods. He would look different after I met him. He certainly would. He'd be like more blue. Right around the face. You know, Rich, it sounds like I'm militant. I'm at the point where I can't stand it. I can't stand these companies who are taking advantage of the unsuspecting, the unknowing. Dogs and cats, for heaven's sakes. Really? They really have to do this? For what? Now, what would that be? What would be the reason why they would do this? I'm trying to think. What would it be? Would it be greed? I think it's greed. And all these CEOs of all these companies that do these things need to be thrown overboard without a parachute, no pension, okay? Right now. And who goes with them? The entire board of directors. And who else? The entire top management team. They all go. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Rich, we're going to talk about preparedness today. And you have some thoughts about gardening, what we can do right now to protect ourselves from the evils that we are seeing, the evils of Monsanto, the evils that have entered into our food system. At one point, we used to have the finest food system in the world. That is no longer the case. There are other countries that won't even allow glyphosate in their crops because it is so toxic to everything.
Mm-hmm.
You want to start with
gardening? Are you ready for me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all,
ready.
I just want to comment on the
back
dog food thing. Okay, first of all, folks, I want to comment on the dog food thing real quick because we have guard dogs here, Great Pyrenees. I wouldn't have a goat, a chicken. I wouldn't have a carrot in my garden if it wasn't for my Great Pyrenees dogs, because they're often nose-to-nose with grizzly bears. Plus, we have black bears and mountain lions, coyotes, fox. You name it, we got it. Birds of prey. They stop all attacks, even from above, and they probably are the most nocturnal dog out there because they've been bred to be guard dogs since the era of Julius Caesar. So regarding the dogs, I try to give my dogs raw meat. I try to give them, and then especially includes raw organs. I get it from credible sources, including from when I hunt myself. We give them table scraps, and we usually give them dog food, and I give them a little bit of 3 different types of dog food, and I rotate the dog food depending on the reputation of quality. So I give them just enough so they can get a little bit of grain from the dog food, and I don't. The reason why I mentioned the dog food last is because I don't trust any of it, and I try to give them raw meat that I would get from a butcher or other credible sources, and that seems to be working quite well. Now, Vince, when you were talking, you mentioned potatoes. This is one of the reasons why I garden, folks, and I talk about it in the context of being a recreational necessity. I know that might sound like an oxymoron to a lot of you, but first of all, the reason why I give it that definition is because I love to garden, okay, and it builds skill sets, and I get to eat organic, non-GMO food, which is proven to cause cancer, organ failure, changes your DNA, and basically the elite have created a system of food production that eliminates all accountability, especially for big agribusiness like you just mentioned, Vince, Monsanto. You know, Monsanto got protection from Congress for years. They may still have a portion of that protection left. And 96% of Monsanto shareholders voted to not disclose what's in GMO ingredients. You mentioned the word greed, Vince. That is the definition of greed. And even the producers of GMO foods are not even required by law to label them as GMO, which should be mandatory here in America. Now, I think there's been some changes in that, but there's still a veil of secrecy. And there are countries around the world who don't even allow GMO foods. Now, soybeans, for example, or soy products, 90% of it is GMO, genetically modified. Now, you mentioned potatoes. Now, when you go to the grocery store, folks, potatoes are often sprayed with a chemical called chlorprofam. C-H-L-O-R-P as in Peter, R-O-P as in Peter, H-A-M. And it's used to slow down the budding of shoots and rot. And also a lot of these products are radiated, and the federal law protects potato farmers. That includes potatoes that come into this country from revealing this information. And whenever you radiate something, when you spray something, you're destroying the nutrition and the vitamins. And how often, when you're on, whether it be Drudge Report, it doesn't matter, how often do you read, almost every day, diseases coming from restaurants, from grocery stores, from wholesalers, salmonella, listeria. I just read recently about a little kid dying of E. coli. You know, these are diseases that not just cause sickness and reduce your immune system and eliminate your chance of homeostasis in the body, but they also produce deaths. So we have to be aware of all this, and this is why I call it a recreational necessity. And when I talk about vegetables, there's a lot of things that go with it. It could be everything to do with self-sufficiency. And I hear the music, Vince, so I'm going to pick up on this on the back end.
Yeah. Rich Sheben's with us, off-grid Montana, and we're going to be talking about things that you can do for yourself to protect yourself. And if you think about it, do you really want to be at the mercy of other people? Think about people who live in the city. What do they do? Not much. They go to work, whatever that is, they get behind a keyboard, then they go out to eat, then they go home and they buy extruded food, and then they eat and then they repeat the same thing. We'll be right back. Hour number 2 of the USA Prepares. Rich and I have been talking about why you should do things for yourself for a very long time. Well, here's another reason. And this is just going to put an exclamation point on what Rich Sheben's been saying. Here are some companies that have adulterated the food that they've been serving you. Taco Bell. In the United Kingdom, traces of horse meat have been found in Taco Bell's ground beef. Horse DNA found in Taco Bell's beef was significant enough that all beef products were pulled and the European supplier was cut from Taco Bell. Burger King. So Silvercrest Foods supplies beef products to Burger King restaurants in the United Kingdom and Ireland. They recall 10 million burger patties because of a food tainting scandal. And it looks like Burger King was serving horse meat. Okay? How about Birdsong? Birdsong Foods, the fast frozen vegetable company, those guys? Well, they found DNA from horses in Belgium. Horse meat was found in their chili con carne. And there was a UK recall of several Birdsong products that was feared to contain horse meat. How's that possible? And 1% horse DNA was found in Birdsong beef lasagna and their bolognese spaghetti sauce. Nestle's beef ravioli and beef tortellini had traces of horse DNA in their mix. Tesco, Tesco, one of the largest grocery chains in the United Kingdom, was found to be selling hamburger patties that were almost 1/3 horse meat. Okay. ASDA stores. It's a subsidiary of Walmart, and they pulled the jars of their pasta sauce, bolognese pasta sauce, after the product was revealed to have traces of horse meat. Lidl, Lidl, another supermarket in Europe. Little stores in Finland found to have traces of horse meat in their beef goulash and ravioli. So just wanted to let you know that there are companies, even Aldi, okay? Aldi pulled the frozen lasagna and spaghetti meals produced by a French company after the products sold in the French market were found to contain horse meat. So, big names selling adulterated meat, claiming it's one thing, actually it's something else, just like the dog food, just like pretty much everything else that has been claimed to be one thing and happens to be something else. You know, just like that 303 premium tractor hydraulic fluid that we were duped into using with the claims that it met all kinds of the appropriate specifications for our needs. No, it didn't. It was a big lie, and now there's a class action lawsuit. I actually hope it takes down Orscheln. Orscheln was selling it. I actually hope it collapses the company, and I hope the CEO, the vice presidents, the executive vice presidents, and all the directors all lose everything they have accumulated as a result. Why? Because they duped us, the little people. There's no excuse for lying, cheating, and stealing. It does not have to be done. Mrs. Finelli was watching a video of the Blue Plague, also known as Blue Bloods. It's on Netflix. And there was an episode where the Blue Blood family, the family of 2 police commissioners and the detective and the assistant district attorney and the cop, the Blue Blood family. The business is police business. That's the family business. So there's this little derby race, where these homemade cars race downhill. And the Blue Bloods cheated. They cheated. They called it juicing. They juiced their little race car. They skirted the rules in order to win. It was that important to win that they had to cheat. So it's everywhere. Everywhere. Rich Scheben, let's protect ourselves from these criminals.
Yeah. Well, let me give a bunch of information here, Vince. We're running out of time, so I'm gonna touch on a few things that you mentioned. And I know there's people who are listening right now who are just leaving the Taco Bell or Burger King drive-through, and they're probably going. But hopefully they'll change their mind with meats. And meats. It's not just gardening, folks. I'm going to go into gardening in a minute, but meats. Everything's been tainted now. There's red dye in meats. There's non-meat grown in laboratories, sold in restaurants and supermarkets. There's steroids, hormones, antibiotics. There's GMO foods. There's pesticide-fed cattle. There's cloning livestock. There's modified proteins and enzymes in lots of foods today, which affects our bioavailability, our absorption of nutrients, excretion, metabolism, and obviously affects the homeostasis in the body, which creates more parasites in gut bacteria and makes us more sick. And Vince, you mentioned glyphosate. I'm just going to mention just a few things. It's a main ingredient in Roundup, folks. I know this audience knows this, but some of the side effects, I'm just going to read a few of them. Stomach and bowel problems, indigestion, ulcers, colitis, gluten intolerance, sleeplessness, lethargy, depression, Crohn's disease, allergies, obesity, infertility, liver disease, renal failure, autism, Alzheimer's, endocrine disruption. And the World Health Organization announced a few years ago that glyphosate was a carcinogen. So someone obviously in WHO wasn't paid off appropriately. So the reason for why we talk about preparedness and self-sufficiency, folks, is because we're in an era where we have to start. This is mandatory. It's mandatory for health. It's mandatory for mental well-being. It's mandatory for survival. You know, we are in a fascist state. That's why horse meat is everywhere, because the big governments are in bed with big corporate oligarchies, and they are controlling everything. And every year there's less and less companies to choose from for competition. This is why we have to do some things ourselves. You know, I go out there and I collect firewood. I grow my own produce, hunt and fish my own meat and fish. I raise animals. I get ready for the winter. I try not to be the grasshopper. For those of you who are old enough to remember the grasshopper and ant story. And, you know, when you really think about all this crap that they're putting in our foods, whether it be meat or gardening, you got to remember GDP is 20% of being sick. Minimum. It could be closer to 30, but I'm being very, very cautious in that number. 20% of our measured GDP, which is like all about God relating to the health of our economy, which I've been saying for years, GDP for the bottom 93% does not mean happiness at all. So let's talk about gardening here. Let's talk about, for those of you who are on drugs or may have parents on drugs, grandparents on drugs. When I say drugs, I mean synthetic pharmaceutical drugs. Your immune system deals with 6 main things: inflammation, circulation, allergies, infection, detoxification, and cancers and tumors. Just think how many people you know, listeners, who your friends and family are taking drugs for this. You know, we're teaching our kids how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. Let's teach them how to garden. Let's teach them a little preparedness and self-sufficiency. Not from a paranoid perspective, but to have fun, because that's what gardening is and self-sufficiency is. It's fun. Now I'm going to mention a few things as quickly as I can so you can get information. This is what I call survival food in my garden. I grow about 25, 30 vegetables of foods, of produce, and I let the second year, this is what I call survival food. Second year carrots often go to seeds, and that gives me, as long as I use heirloom and open pollinated seeds, I will get baby carrots the next year all over the garden. I'll spread it out. Same thing with spinach, especially spinach. I let my heirloom open pollinated spinach go to seed on the peripheries of my garden, and once it goes to seed, I'll lay it in the garden. And when I usually start my seeds in my solarium about end of March, early April. So I'll put my plants, like my cabbage family, which includes cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, all immune stimulants, in and around where my seeds are germinating, so I can see where to put my plants, so I optimize all my space. Now, that being said, after spinach, I also get, I let Swiss chard, Chinese carrot, cabbage go to seed. I also have lemon sorrel, which is a huge immune stimulant. I really recommend doing lemon sorrel because it just makes a big difference to, it's a annual, and it comes up every year, and it's extremely healthy for you. So I recommend you doing that. I call that a survival food as well. And it's in my edible and medicinal plant category. And sorrel is the wild sorrel, the sheep sorrel. And it's an arrow-shaped leaf. It's got vitamin A and C. And it's in the ACEAC formula, which is a cancer-curing formula that I believe a Canadian nurse invented that. And it really made a difference for a lot of people. I'm just looking through all my notes here trying to find things. Anyway, I also grow kale, lettuce. I have several different types of heirloom lettuces. Lovage. Lovage is a great garden. They call it an herb, but it basically is a celery that's a perennial celery that comes up and grows like 6 feet high. So it's great for survival food. I also have currants. I got my fruit trees, chives, asparagus, raspberries, strawberries. And again, I want to be repetitive on this. You have to buy heirloom open-pollinated seeds, okay, or else you will not get natural germination. I also think it's so important, folks, for those of you who live in suburban America. I know this is tough for urban people, but for those of you in suburban America, starting your own composting pile is so important. Now, I use straw in my barn for my goats and in my chicken coop, and it's all laced with, obviously, their poop. I throw it in my compost pile along with eggshells and tomato stems, you name it, and I have great soil going into next year. And we'll be back after the break, folks.
OffGridMontana.com. Rich Scheben's with us. You know, Rich, you and I were talking off the air about, a couple days ago, about we don't throw anything away, including coffee grounds. So when we have coffee grounds that have been used, Mrs. Finelli puts them in a stainless steel bowl on the kitchen counter, and they get used. Next thing that happens is they become compost. They if I find them first, I'll get a tablespoon, and I'll take that stainless steel bowl, and I'll sprinkle by the tablespoon coffee grounds, the indoor houseplants, my dwarf fruit trees outside, my avocado tree, they go everywhere. And if she finds them first, they go in the compost pile. So that's what happens. We don't throw anything away. So you can do the same thing with your the outer lettuce leaves, produce that has gone bad, into the compost pile it goes. And now it becomes fertilizer for your garden. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you do, Rich?
Well, I'll tell you, Vince, outside of maybe glass, which is very rare, and plastic, everything gets reused. And when I say everything, I mean everything. I have chickens, I have goats, I have large dogs, and a compost pile. Everything gets recycled around here. I mean, and that's one of the things about the myth of people who live in urban, suburban America who might be listening to this. You know, you always talk about being green. You always talk about, especially young people and the millennials and their high-tech skills. Well, move out to rural America and live off the grid, which is electronic, high-tech, and live a green life like I do. And it really is a great life, but too many people don't practice what they preach. Too many people are calling for all this green stuff and all this what's best for the people, but it's not what's best for the people. The elite, the powers that be, want to herd everybody into urban, suburban America, have everybody live in 600-square-foot apartments, and be surveilled and silenced and controlled and basically told what to do, what to say, and how to think. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned about voter fraud and election fraud. We can talk all day long. If President Trump does not fix this and make voting legitimate, we have a very good chance of losing everything in America, and that includes the rule of law as well. So what I want to do is, and when I talk about meat and hunting, folks, I want to make it perfectly clear that when it comes to hunting and fishing, it's not grocery shopping. Because when you spend time hunting and fishing, your success rate is not as good as it shows in the hunting and fishing television shows, okay? They only show you the success stories. So, that's one of the reasons why we also raise animals like chickens, and we've done turkeys, and we have our goats that we milk, and we, if it got bad, we could always slaughter the goats and eat them. But hopefully, my skill set of hunting will keep us going for a little bit. And that's what hunting is. That's what fishing is. That's what gardening is. It's a skill set. If you think you're going to just throw your seeds in the soil, you better think twice. And soil is so important because that's where the nutrients come from. Vitamins and mineral come from the soil. So for those of you who are buying old, flat pasture land, very good chance your soil has been chemically and mechanically beat to smithereens. And that's one of the reasons for saving every organic piece of vegetable, fruit matter, eggshells, coffee grounds, just like Vince was saying. You have to build your own soil today because you get all those minerals and vitamins from the soil. Even the enzymes that go into the vegetable is so important. It comes from the soil. These are groups of proteins that are produced by living cells. They act as catalysts for biochemical reactions, and that aids in digestion and nutrient support. But as the powers that be, through in vitro, test tube, laboratory synthesis, keeps messing with proteins and enzymes and yeasts, and they modify them, our metabolism and nutrients, digestion, everything is being changed, and it's making us more obese. It's making us not be able to digest these important nutrients. Who knows what they're doing in the back rooms of laboratories, like amino acids. There's 20 naturally occurring amino acids at least. 8 of those are called essential amino acids. 8 of them cannot be synthesized in human cells, but they have to be consumed for our homeostasis to occur with our diet. Who knows if they've been eliminated from this new food technology that we have. And it's so important that we build these sets, especially if you have kids. Words like are so important. You don't hear them much unless you go to a good, credible health food store, like antioxidant, which obviously cancer tumor fighters, immune system stimulants or builders, blood purification. We have to go back to the old ways. Like when I mentioned sheep's oil, there's that ACEAC therapy by that, I believe a Canadian nurse invented it years ago. She used burdock root, sheep's oil, rhubarb root, which is wild rhubarb, and slippery elm inner bark. So we need to start going back to those old ways of basically learning things that make us healthy again. When you go to a store, okay, you mentioned propylene glycol, I believe, earlier in the show, Vince. What that is, people, is an antifreeze. This is a product found in a lot of our food and food-like substances. It's an antifreeze. Even fluoride. You mentioned that earlier, Vince. It's basically it's been known to cause cancer. It's a main ingredient in rat poison. China labels it as a pesticide. It actually has been associated with tooth decay and brain lesions, and it makes women sterile. It makes everybody else docile. So, years ago, everything was a conspiracy theory. All the globalists, that's all conspiracy theory. The one world currency, it's a conspiracy theory. Well, now they have to admit to it because we, the people, are reading up and researching up. And we got to look at the bigger picture and not this left-right paradigm. We have to look at truth. We have to look at at the gag orders by people who work at NOAA and other scientists. We have to go back to the old ways. We can't throw out what made us great. In other words, we have to relearn those old 19th century skills, but dovetail them with 21st century technology. And that's what my solar array is. That's 21st century technology. So I want to mention some of the things that I harvest that are immune stimulants and not immune suppressants. Now listen, folks, I'll be the first to admit. I will be the first to admit that I have a sweet tooth. I inherited that from my dad. I love ice cream and all that type of stuff. But there's a lot of things that I eat that fight the immune suppressants that I take, and that's why I call them immune stimulants. And some would be onions, garlic, hot peppers like cayenne pepper, ginger. I realize we can't grow that. We have to purchase that. Horseradish, kale, all the cabbage family that I mentioned earlier in the show. We have to rethink nutrition, hydration, exercise, sleep, excess exposure to chemicals, all this food-like products, all this fat-free usually means high sugar content. In other words, we are overfed, undernourished, and underexercised. MSG, you should see all the artificial sweeteners and the aspartame, the nicotine, high fructose corn syrup. There's dozens of names for MSG out there, and they're all designed to be highly addictive. So one of the acronyms that I use is SARP, S-A-R-P, synthetic, artificial, refined, and processed. This is why we need to keep away from all this stuff. Now, what I'd like to do is mention, because I keep, sometimes when I'm on with Doc Ram and we talk about this stuff, I always talk about, I'm going to finally talk about edible and medicinal plants. Well, Vince, I'm going to take a couple of minutes and just talk about some of the things that I harvest in the wild that either grow in my garden or I go out into the forest. One of the things is chaga. Okay, it's a dry mushroom. It's a fungus that kills certain types of cancers and tumors. So it's an anti-inflammatory as well. And what I do is I drink it during the winter months. I'll put it in a canning jar and leave it on my stove where it doesn't get too hot. I put it on the warming tray because you don't want anything to get, especially when you're talking about enzymes, you want every enzyme. That's why I'm such a proponent of eating raw food from the garden. Because when you start cooking anything over 130 degrees Fahrenheit, you kill the enzymes. And I talked about that earlier, how they act as catalysts for biochemical reaction, which aids in digestion and nutrient support. So it's all connecting the dots. So when I harvest chaga, I harvest it from birch trees, which gives me the benefit of the butylene and butylenic acid that I get from the inner bark of the birch. And the chaga mushroom, this fungus, is strongest during the winter months. The cold, when you harvest it from cold climates like here in Montana, that's when you get the most efficacy from the product. So that's one thing that I harvest. I also harvest. Now, when I talk about edible medicinal plants, now there are certain opinions on, for example, palatability, toxicity. And when I talk about toxicity, it could be an emetic situation, could be a laxative, liver or kidney issues. This is why, and I'm not just saying this as a disclaimer, you have to pick up the books and create interest in biology, in natural ways of healing. And it's up to you to do the reading and research. And we say this all the time on usaprepares.com. Asparagus. not only do I grow up my garden, I also harvest wild asparagus. It's a huge immune stimulant, which helps with reducing gout, arthritic conditions. I drink lots of water when I take products or wild plants of that nature. The inner bark of birch, like I mentioned, it reduces inflammation and pain. And the benefit of the butylenic acid and the butylin fights tumors and kidneys issues, blood and liver cleanses, even improves pancreatic function. This is, again, up to you to look at. Burdock. When I see wild burdock growing out in the woods, I harvest the root. It's a blood purifier and an anti-inflammatory and helps reduce uric acid. So it's very healing. Dandelion, the whole plant is edible, folks. Vitamin A and C. Now, for those of you who live anywhere in the United States these days, including rural America, you have to, if you're not harvesting something on your property, you need to ask the farmer, the rancher, or somebody. If you're not in, for example, National Forest Service, you need. And when I say not in National Forest Service, I mean you got to be off the road because a lot of states spray along the roadways, and that's where you get the majority of a lot of edible and medicinal plants, which is along the roadway. You got to go off the roadway because it's probably been sprayed. But dandelion, man, vitamin A, vitamin C, elderberry we harvest in the fall. That's been our best homemade wine that we ever made, and we make a lot of homemade wine because we have a lot of people who come over and drink it. Raspberry is one of people's favorites. Grape wine, fireweed. For those of you who have gardens, here in northwest Montana, we have lots of fireweed. And I cultivate my fireweed, and when it starts to get the seeds, which is almost like a silk, that's when I cut the fireweed down so I can keep it under control. And I let it grow in my greenhouse. I let it grow in my garden. And what the benefit of fireweed, not only is it edible, okay, the flowers, the leaves, the roots, but the flowers are so beautiful, and they attract bees, pollinators, into my greenhouse, which helps with pollinating my tomato plants, for example, and my cucumbers and my zucchini and things of that nature. Foxtail grass grows. It's like a flower cluster. It's related to like a domestic barley. It's got vitamin B. Gooseberry. Gooseberry grows wild here in Montana. Has vitamin C, A. You can even eat the leaves as well as the berries. And same thing with currant. Hawthorn. I've actually made jelly, jams and jellies out of hawthorn, or I mix it with serviceberry and chokecherry. I have all over my property because I live here on a small river, and I have so many edible medicinal plants and berries on my property. Here's just a list of 10 things that I have on my property regarding berries: wild strawberry, raspberries, Oregon grape, currant, gooseberries, serviceberries, chokecherries, hawthorn berries, kinnick berries, and buffalo berry. Now, not all of them are the most palatable, but they're all survival foods. So especially in and around my garden area, I will literally water these plants, these wild plants, to cultivate them and make them healthy for my consumption, whether they be for survival, for jams and jellies, or just for eating. I personally love serviceberry. I love chokecherry, especially when you get it during the ripest part. And, of course, you got to fight the birds to them. And if I didn't have guard dogs, I wouldn't be able to even have a berry because I have so many berry patches. And I leave, and the bears get to eat the berries on the river. I don't harvest the berries along the river. And there's tons of chokecherries, serviceberries, and hawthorn berries there as well. So it's all fun. Next thing, I harvest right around my garden. For those of you who do garden, who do churn up your soil, I'm sure you're all aware of lamb's quarter. Lamb's quarter has so many different types of names, and I pick the leaves and literally put them in my salad. And it has vitamin C, it has calcium. My only recommendation for lamb's quarter is don't eat large quantities or the seeds. Okay? Anything that has seeds to it, I would not eat just to play it safe. Also, larch, western larch or tamarack, I harvest the inner bark during the winter, and it cleanses your liver. It's got a compound called xanthine oxidase. It also has vitamin B and C, and it slows uric acid buildup. When you get older, that's important. I'll harvest nettle, including stinging nettle, which, you can eat the leaves and roots, has vitamin C. You just got to cook it, and it will neutralize the sting. I have wild plantain growing all over my garden area. I haven't harvested that, but I know it's an edible plant, and I have it all over. Wild onion grows all over northwest Montana. It's an immune stimulant. My only recommendation for any type of onion is when you pick it, you have to make sure it's not death camas. Death camas, when it's not flowering. When it's flowering, you can tell the difference between death camas and onion. But when it's not flowering, it looks just like a wild onion. You've got to make sure it smells, and even if you put your tongue to it, you got to make sure it tastes like onion. If it doesn't at least smell like onion, you have to disregard it. Same with anything in the parsley family, because you don't want to eat water hemlock, which looks similar to cow parsnip. I can tell them apart night and day, but I'm used to it. Most people can't. Anything in that parsley carrot family, I would yield on harvesting that. Oregon grape everywhere here. We've actually made homemade wine from Oregon grape. Purslane grows, especially in garden areas where dirt has been churned up. It's delicious. Red clover. I will take red clover and put them and harvest them. This time of year, right now, red clover is all over the place. And I'll put them in a dehydrator, mostly a solar dehydrator, with my the rose hips, and I'll put them in my winter teas. And you can eat the blossoms, the herb. It fights cancers and tumors. It has anti-inflammatory properties. So all that stuff. Oxeye daisy. Oxeye daisy grows all over Montana. Believe it or not, it's considered to be what do they call it? Like knapweed and leafy spurs. They call it a toxic plant, and there's another name for it. The only reason they call it that, and this is why you have to do the reading and research, is because animals, cows, won't eat it. Because when oxeye daisy grows up into a beautiful daisy flower, the stems won't be eaten by the cattle or the sheep and other domestic animals, so they call it a toxic plant. Now, when the oxeye daisy is first coming up out of the soil, it's got a clump of leaves before the stem comes up. And I will put all that stuff, including some of the things I just mentioned, into my salads, especially early in the year. Now, when I mentioned the term palatability earlier, palatability is associated with an early young plant and a late bitter plant. And just like your domestic vegetables in the garden, the later and older the plant is, usually it's associated with more bitterness. And it could be broccoli, it could be radishes, it could be so many things. So the younger you harvest these plants, the more tasty and fun it is to eat. Now, strawberry and raspberry blight also has it. It all depends on which book you get it from. It's related to spinach, and I eat it in small quantities. I'll add to salad. It has vitamin B, C, and iron and calcium, and it's a great supplement. And I do a lot of edible medicinal tours. I think last week I had like 4 different people here looking at my garden because people want ideas. People move into the area. They hear about me. They want to find out what I'm growing, what grows here, what garden ideas on raised beds and greenhouses they can glean to make life simple. But if you live in nature and you're not living, if you don't at least have a small garden, at least a kitchen herb garden, I think you're really missing out on a lot of fun and skill set building. And again, I know I'm repetitive on this, but we're teaching our youth how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. We're not teaching them anything but unhappiness. And nature creates synergy. Skill sets creates synergy. And what it also creates is the willingness of people who have these skill sets wanting to teach other people and make their lives a little simpler. I also harvest thimbleberry along the roads, Guineith, and of course we have lots of high mountain huckleberries as well. So, and I've got a list. I can do 2 shows on this stuff. But I just want to hit the basic stuff that when you garden and you can take vitamins and minerals from wild plants and combine them with your regular salads. Now, my salads, I grow kale, spinach, Swiss chard, lemon sorrel. I got like 3 different kinds of heirloom lettuce. Most of these things I do not plant. In other words, I allow them, I use heirloom open pollinated seeds, and I allow them to go to seed. And then late in the summer, I will basically pull those plants and spread the seeds to different parts of my garden. Now, for those of you who think you get 100% germination or 100% pollination, or even close to 100% when you start your little plants and you put them outdoors, it never happens. So you always got to have a little extra. I grow about 60 tomato plants. We love to eat tomato sandwiches during mid to late summer. I'll start getting tomatoes usually probably in about 2 weeks. I'll start getting some tomatoes. And we'll eat tomatoes often into January. And we'll pick them green, and let them ripen downstairs in the basement in a brown paper bag, and that works great. So keep in mind, folks, for those of you who are spending a ton of money on health care and who are taking drugs, anything regarding inflammation, circulation, allergies, infection, detoxification, cancers and tumors, the importance of being natural, the importance of growing your own food, the importance of being aware that vitamins and minerals come from the soil and not the pretty vegetables in the store, because you never know where they came from, who grew them, what kind of pesticides and chemicals have been used on them, how poor the soil was. And people don't have time to think about immune stimulants versus immune suppressants. But all you have to do is look around. All you have to do is look at old pictures and old movies and see what America used to look like compared to today. And there's a lot more to consider just besides gluten intolerance and geoengineering. You know, the people at the top care more about increasing shelf life in the store or after the product or the wheat or whatever is cut out in the field for their profits. They don't care if we, as the little people, can't digest the nutrients. And it's up to us to do. And I'm seeing a big movement right now of people who are getting away from that nanotechnology, tracking food to farm to fork. And I see a lot of people wanting to move rural. I see a lot of people leaving urban, suburban America. I see a lot of people fearing 5G, and they should.
Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Rich Sheben, you had a couple guests visit you from out of state last week. I just had a quick question for you. What did you serve your visitors? We had a couple guys visit you. What did you serve them that was probably a little out of the ordinary?
Oh, you're talking about your buddies. Yeah, we served them moose burgers. We had a little bit of elk sausage. I I think we had some moose steak, and of course everything, probably about 6 or 7 different leafy greens, salad greens out of the garden. So yeah, it's all fun. It's organic, no GMO, no pesticides, and it's a great lifestyle, folks. I'm not telling people that they need to be a hunter or they even need to raise their own meat, but growing your own produce is so much fun. And I probably raise 90% of the produce here, and if I was to, I could probably do 100% if I did more root crops. But I just love the variety of all the things that I grow here. And this is here I am in northwest Montana. So if I can do it here, you guys can do it in most of the country, Vince.
Rich, you mentioned wine. You make your own wine, and you make different kinds of wine. Can you just give us a quick thumbnail sketch of what does it take to make your own wine? Is it legal? And how much can you make, and how long does it take, and what's the difference when it comes to taste and so forth?
Well, I'll tell you something. I'm going to use an analogy, not just from wine, but from bottled water. When I buy bottled water, folks, which is rare, extremely rare, even when I go out somewhere for a day or two, I take water from home. But for those of you who do have the luxury of drinking out of a well where you don't have close neighbors and you don't have to worry about the leaching of somebody else's septic or drain field, there's a huge difference in taste because fluoride, chlorine, there's 100 minimum chemicals in municipal water, and I could taste the difference. Same thing with wine. Now, wine, there's no legal issue unless you're selling it. Once you start selling something, then you got the loopholes. Then you got the FDA, restrictions, and they got to check everything you do. And it's not so much.
Even worse than that is
It's based. What was that?
The BATF. Even worse than the FDA is the BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The alcohol part. They'll come visit you. You're right.
Well, not only that, the big corporations have so much special interest and lobbyists and PAC and money influence under the table that they are keeping the little guy from competing. That's what it's all about. That's part of this fascist system. And you mentioned, and that's why I talked about some of the what glyphosate was linked to. Well, I know we've done this on this show. We've mentioned where glyphosate was in everywhere: foods, waters, wines, beers. We've talked about this. That's why I mentioned I linked it to all these side effects that I talked about, because you can not only just taste the difference in quality, but you can get natural yeast. I know people, you don't even have to buy yeast. I know people who make wine, Vince, and I have friends who we have hops all over my garden that grows practically wild. And hops, by the way, is an edible plant, especially when it's young. You cook the young shoots, and it's delicious. Same thing with, when I mentioned fireweed. I really label that as poor man's asparagus when it's young. It's delicious. So with yeast, I know people who have literally harvested yeast off of willow bushes in late fall when the freeze is coming, so they can make wine. People get real creative in this neck of the woods. What Montana, especially western Montana, brings is a lot of people who love nature. And you can live a natural world many ways. It doesn't have to be hunting and fishing. It doesn't have to be raising animals. I know people, we harvest mushrooms. We pick berries in the wild. Do a lot of hiking. I remember when we went to Germany a few years ago, the people who were with us couldn't believe it, because we were walking around and pointing all these edible and medicinal plants that they have that because a lot of plants came from Europe, obviously. So it's all nature, it's all fun, and that's the way you have to look at it, folks.
You know what we should do, Rich Scheben? We should do a broadcast, maybe an hour on making wine. How do you do it? What equipment do you need? Do you need bubblers? Do you need to buy the yeast? Can you make it with grape juice out of a bottle? What dandelion roots, dandelion leaves, dandelion wine? What can we make wine out of? What kind of berries? Would you like to do that?
Yes,
I'd love to.
all the above.
Sounds good. Let's try for next weekend, or next week. Let's do that. Rich Scheben's with us, off-grid Montana. Thanks so much for being with us, Rich.